Production support for INFocus is provided by viewers like you. Thank you.
Multiculturalism is defined as racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity. Since more than 1 in 6 Hoosiers are considered a member of a minority population, Indiana is an unexpected multicultural center in the Midwest. With new policies being instated by local universities and corporations on the topic of diversity, the presence and acceptance of minorities is set to increase. What do these resolutions mean for the future of Indiana's culture? Find out as we put diversity in focus. Hi, I'm Ann Shea, and thanks for joining us. Tonight we welcome our WFIU listeners and WTIU viewers. We appreciate your support as both an audience and as participants in our INFocus discussion, so get ready to send in your questions about diversity. Our in-studio experts are available to answer or address any of these questions you may have. Email us at infocus@indiana.edu or give us a call 1-800-987-9848. Well, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, Indiana has the 27th largest minority population in the United States, with 1,045,000 people, or 15% of the state's total population. In the coming years, these numbers are predicted to rise, so schools and businesses are taking the initiative to encourage students, faculty, and employees to understand and promote multiculturalism in their everyday lives. But what makes the crossroads of America so diverse, and how will our definition of diversity change in the near future?
This year, the nation witnessed a major milestone with the election of the first African-American president. As of February 2009, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates a total U.S. population of 306 million people. In 2008, minorities made up about 32% of the total population.
Diversity is more than a concept to me. It's something that I take personally. And for me, living through last year and watching the campaign and culminating again in the inauguration was just an extraordinary thing to witness. 2 or 3 days after Barack Obama was inaugurated, we weren't really talking about race anymore. I think that's a huge step for the country. It obviously doesn't solve all the problems of race and diversity and identity, and it's not that we've suddenly entered some sort of post-racial era.
The most recent statistics project Indiana's estimated total minority population as 1,045,000, the largest African American, followed by Hispanics. The Hispanic population in Indiana has grown by more than 100,500 people. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates from 2000 to 2007 a growth rate of 47%, which places Indiana 23rd out of 50 states and the District of Columbia. Currently, Hispanics account for 15% of the total U.S. population.
The Latino community, we are Muslim, we are Jewish, we are Asian, we're African, Afro-Latinos, we are European, indigenous. I think people would be surprised to find out that there is a connection. Not only there might be some differences, but there's some similarities.
It is projected by 2050, minorities will make up about 54% of the total U.S. population. According to the U.S. Department of Education, National Center for Education Statistics, Indiana ranks 38th of 51, including the District of Columbia, for diversity in the classroom in the United States. In 2006, diversity totaled 20% of the student population. Casillas says, though education is part of the learning process, it first begins with oneself.
It will help them to understand how they see things, what their relationships will be like with the people who might be different from them. How are their own values and beliefs influence how they look at the world, how they interact with others. And that's something you can control, and that's something you can understand, to understand yourself, to then understand how then you will interact with others.
Tonight, we put diversity in focus.
And helping me tonight is WFIU's News Director Stan Jastrzebski. Stan, what's your lineup this evening?
And we'll talk by phone with Alelia Bundles, who is the great-great-granddaughter of an Indianapolis business icon. We'll tell you which one. And I'll be joined in studio by Laura Plummer, who's the chairwoman of the board of the Lotus Foundation. We'll talk with them later. Right now, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Stan. With the continued increase of diversity in the country, the U.S. Census Bureau estimates a total U.S. population of 306 million people. In 2008, minorities made up 32% of the total population, and by 2050, it is projected that minorities will make up about 54%. This increase is partially due to the influx of the Hispanic population to our country. So how's the Hoosier State dealing with this increase? We have a few experts that will help address some of these questions. Tonight, joining me is the superintendent of Seymour Community Schools, Dr. Taryn Armstrong. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Eric Love, the director of diversity education at Indiana University.
Good to be here.
And the director of the Latino Cultural Center, Lillian Casillas. Lillian, thank you for being here as well. We're just going to start the conversation and keep it a little bit general. Lillian, let's start with you. Why should we be talking about diversity right now?
Well, as we've seen, I mean, there's been a growth in the community regarding the folks that are coming in, and especially for me, that working with the Latino community, that's something that a lot of folks have come to see. Especially, I think, has been really interesting because there has been not only a typical growth within areas that already had a minority community like Indianapolis or Lake County, but you're also seeing growth in places that perhaps there have never been minorities before or Latinos before. And it's been in locations that perhaps, let's say, 3-4 years ago, there might have not been anyone. All of a sudden, you have this huge community in there. And while maybe in some cases they're very welcome, sometimes folks are, maybe there might not be so much of an understanding. Folks don't know what to do. They're maybe having to do with issues of language barriers, cultural issues that maybe they don't understand. So I think we need to start talking about diversity and because to understand the people that are coming into the state and how we can have a very good quality of life for everybody.
Taryn, why don't you speak on that, because you're in Jackson County, and that's one of the counties in Indiana that has seen a large influx of Hispanics into the county. You're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis.
Right, in Seymour, Seymour is part of Jackson County, and just like you said, it's God's country in Indiana, and it's part of the state that has not had much diversity other than economic diversity. And so to have any multicultural diversity has been a true awakening. And in the last 10 years, in the Jackson County area alone, the population has grown 15% to increase Hispanic populations. And Seymour also has brought in some Japanese companies. So we also have an Asian population. The African American population is relatively small. But a study that we received from the Eli Lilly Foundation predicts that in the next 20 years, the Latino population will grow in southern Indiana by 239%. As it will be the fastest growing minority in that part of the state, with the black population only growing 37%. So I think it's a very compelling reason to step back and look at what are we doing in schools, what are we doing in our community, and how does every child and every member of that community feel a part of the community and feel like it's a great place to live.
Eric, can we talk about that? I mean, what should our conversations be like now? I mean, they should be a little bit different when we're talking about diversity and race relations, right?
It should be. Actually, we've been talking about how the world is we have a global economy and we're all interconnected. And so the influx of Hispanics in the Latino community coming into Indiana is just making it more real and more tangible for people to see. Those of us who are in diversity, like Lily and I are colleagues, so we work quite a bit together. We have been talking about how students need to be, all of us actually, faculty, students, staff, need to be multiculturally competent. And we need to learn about each other, learn about different religions, races, and those things that make us different from each other. But if we do that, we can get along better, and we can look at diversity as a strength, how it should be.
I have to ask that, and this is a question that everybody is asking, do you all believe that the election of President Obama made any impact on race relations? How did it change that conversation?
Okay. I'll go first.
Sure.
First, I think it did certainly break down a lot of barriers. millions and millions and millions of people voted for an African American president or a biracial president. And so I think that was fantastic. I think it also brought to the forefront some racial problems, because there seems to be a little backlash because we have an African American president now. And I think maybe the shooting at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., I think is related to that also. So the extreme people who were racist or not interested in diversity, they're very upset that we have a black president. But for the most part, I think people are very happy now. We'll just see how well he does.
We'll continue this conversation in just a minute. Let's change the pace a bit and go over to the radio booth with Stan. Stan?
Thanks, Ann. Well, if you've talked about Indianapolis business with somebody before, you may have talked about Madam C.J. Walker, who in the late 19th century and early 20th century built an empire, one of the first African Americans, men or women, to do so in the business world. And you may not have heard of her great-great-granddaughter, who is Alelia Bundles, a former ABC News executive who's on the phone with us now. Ms. Bundles, thanks for being with us. And you've done some study about how your great-great-grandmother did her job and built up her empire, and consequently what happened to race relations in the intervening 50 or 100 years. What do you think we've learned in that time?
The attitudes in America are very different now than they were 100 years ago when Madam Walker was first starting her business. We don't have the ingrained legal racism that existed at that point. And yes, lots and lots of doors have opened, and there are lots of opportunities. You know, unfortunately, there is always going to be a small group of people in America and around the world who are very narrow-minded and who maintains racial prejudices. But fortunately, the country has really progressed and moved beyond those kinds of attitudes for the most part.
So as you say, we've come a long way in the last 50 to 100 years, but I'm assuming it's fair to say that more can still be done. And so I'd like to know what you think is still necessary to make the country even more diverse as we move forward into the future.
One of the key things that's so important in America is education. And I think that we are in a crisis right now with public school education in many of the major cities in America. And when schools are not as good as they could be, and they really are denying generation after generation the opportunities to succeed. And again, we can look at somebody like Sonia Sotomayor, who grew up in the projects in New York, but was able to go to, at that point, a Catholic school, and others who've gone to public schools when public schools were excellent in many, many cities, and now many of our public schools are suffering. So I think as long as we have a public school system in most major cities that is challenged, that makes it that much harder for anybody, you know, regardless of race, regardless of economic background, et cetera, to achieve. So I think that's important. Having a great education is the foundation for being able to compete.
You talked about public high school education. I'm wondering if you think that extends also to higher education. Places like IU are really working hard to increase their minority enrollment. What kinds of programs or services or incentives do you think a place like IU must offer in order to succeed in that goal?
Equal access to higher education and scholarships and fellowships money so that people can study. Attitudes among admissions committees in some of our institutions of higher learning is very important. And also in our corporations, there have to be people in leadership positions at the top who insist that there is diversity in our corporations and in our major institutions.
Alelia Bundles is the great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker and a former ABC News executive. We thank you so much for being with us this evening, Ms. Bundles.
All right, thanks so much.
And back to you in the studio.